Ohio Domestic Action Plan webinar for spring of 2024. First up, I have a welcome from our Executive Director at the Ohio Lake Erie Commission, Joy Mullinex. Take it away, Joy.
All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us both in person and online for our 2024 Ohio Domestic Action Plan workshop. And of course, thank you to the University of Toledo for hosting us this afternoon. So as you know, Ohio has submitted our revised DAP to US EPA. That was submitted earlier this year. And the Commission appreciates all of the comments that were submitted to help us improve our DAP and keep us thinking about future challenges for nutrient management. Sandra, I hope you're hearing me. Okay. Reducing nutrients and meeting the targets under Annex 4 is a complex challenge for all of us, and the conversations and coordination on the best way to meet those targets will need to continue at forums like today's. So we welcome questions and comments throughout this afternoon. So again, thank you for joining us. And Dr. Sandra Kosek-Sills has pulled together a great lineup of presentations. So Sandra, I will turn things back to you.
Okay, thank you, Joy. So let me get this settled here. All right. Are you guys seeing the DAP presentation? Yep. Okay, perfect. All righty. So my name is Sandra Kosek-Sills. I'm with the Ohio Lake Erie Commission. We're here to talk to you today about the Ohio Domestic Action Plan. We'll have a conversation with many of our partners at the state agencies, and also we will have the NRCS will also speak to us a little bit, but we do want to make it a little more of a conversation. So we will have breaks and time for questions and answers in between the presentations. So for the agenda, we're going to start with talking about implementation efforts. I'll give a very quick overview of the Domestic Action Plan. We'll talk about progress on implementing the agricultural BMPs and also the wetlands work that ODNR is handling, and then the role of the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL, a little bit about watershed planning efforts on the USDA NRCS. Will talk to us a little bit about their implementation efforts. We'll break for some questions and discussion. And then I'll talk a little bit about the status of the harmful algal blooms and nutrient levels in the lake and tributaries. And then we'll have more time for discussion, and then we'll close with a very brief bit of what's next. So just a quick overview of what's in the Domestic Action Plan, talking in terms of actions. We have our agricultural best management practices. We're focusing on that as our primary effort because we know that the majority of the non-point source pollution is coming from our agricultural areas. We also have actions for wetlands restoration. We have actions for community supports. This is primarily home sewage treatment remediation in the watersheds. There's also some work done that's detailed in the DAP appendices around the municipal wastewater treatment plants. We also have a watershed planning component, which is includes the distribution of the load throughout the Maumee watershed to aid in our planning and implementation efforts. We also have the Maumee TMDL as an additional action. And there's a lot of support actions, including things like the monitoring program, tracking of the BMPs as they're going in, and also the monitoring, the reporting out, that's in terms of like our water monitoring summary. And then there's research programs, modeling efforts, and outreach. And then we also have an appendix. We try to stay in touch with our partners and keep track of what they're doing, not just our federal partners and our state partners, but also the local organizations such as the Nature Conservancy, the Farm Bureau, the Ohio Agribusiness Association and others. So what's new for 2023? We did carry over a considerable amount of actions, but we did do some updates for the projects and programs that were being implemented through H2 Ohio. ODA has made some adjustments in the farmer programs, and so all of that was reflected in the plan. And we also did a little bit of tweaking of the target setting for the load targets because we had some additional information on the Portage River, so we were adding that into the mix. And then we also have some discussion on the Huron River and the Grand River. The areas to the east along Lake Erie's shoreline in Ohio are more for load reductions that would be helping out the hypoxia in the central basin. That has not been a primary focus, but it's still something that we encompass within the DAP as looking at practices and programs and load reductions that could be happening in those areas. We also have included a little bit more information about the TMDL and some of the things that are going on after that. And we did adjust the load distribution in Appendix A so that it is more reflective of what is put in the TMDL as far as loading targets and who's responsible for what. And then the last thing is we have incorporated some new information from and ideas for research and modeling. And one of the things that we will be looking at is new ideas for studying prioritization. That would be like prioritization of the locations of practices to try to get even better efficiency. And then also talking a little bit more about technology solutions because our technology program has advanced. All right, and then we are going to switch presentations. So give me a second here. First up will be ODA. So one thing we didn't test, Terry, was whether or not, go ahead and speak and let's see, could Nicole or Joy, if one of you could tell me whether we can hear Terry all right?
Well, good morning, everybody. Happy to be here and share what ODA is doing in regards to what we're doing with the H2 Ohio currently. If you want to advance the slide.
We can hear you.
Can you see the slides as well?
Yes.
We can also see the slides.
Okay. Some of this is a little bit of a review where we've been with H2 Ohio. But for the most part, H2 Ohio looks at trying to achieve the load reductions with phosphorus and nitrogen through basically through three main objectives: better nutrient management, reducing erosion or better management of erosion, as well as water management. Just a little bit of history. As you all know, we started to deliver the program in 2021. We had added 10 additional counties in 2022. So across those 24 counties, that allows any producer in Ohio that is in the Western Lake Erie Basin as defined by revised code to participate in ODA's conservation program. We are currently also expanding to the 64 counties just with a nutrient management plan initiative to develop those plans over 64 counties. Right now, we have just completed, recently completed a new sign up across our original Maumee watershed counties. With that, we've increased our overall footprint to approximately 1.85 million acres that are currently enrolled in the program. This is roughly just shy of 1.3 million acres across the original 14 counties. In those 14 counties, we're currently developing the nutrient management plans and preparing the actual contracts for practices currently. We're working hard to get those developed, but our producers are also implementing those practices as we go. So they're in close coordination with their ag retailers and the soil and water district, moving those forward. So nearly 2,600 producers currently in the program. Those nutrient management plans that we are writing are compliant with 590. We are making some adjustments in the software that we're using to cover the last step of the 590 process, which is the soil erosion portion of it. So we did not include that for these 14 counties in general. Soil erosion rates are well below T in that area, and we didn't have the capacity to bring all that in at once, but we are bringing that in now with these new nutrient management plans under development currently. If we look at enrollment over the entire 24 counties, this was our practice enrollment for 2023. As I said, we're developing the contracts for 24 and 25 currently for the 14 districts. We would look for these numbers to expand as we get the new enrollment numbers for 24 and 25 finalized. We have seen extraordinary interest in the program. So we're really happy with where that has been. And again, our goal by the close or by July 1 of 2025 is to have an overall footprint in the across these 24 counties of about 2 million acres. So we've got some options, looking at some contract extensions or some new signups in the additional 10 counties as we move forward. So just a reminder, Sandra had mentioned some changes that ODA had made. We originally started to offer 7 different practices through our program. And as we delivered the program, we found that we had a lot of overlap between some of those different practices. And what we did was we decided to streamline those practices. We are still incentivizing the same activities, but trying to streamline the overall delivery and reduce some of the confusion. And the biggest change we made is we've brought the nutrient management plans and the precision incentives underneath the nutrient management plan implementation itself, which clears up some confusion for the producer, as well as taking our conservation crop rotations for small grains and forages and the overwintering cover crop and melding that all into one practice, which is now just overwintering cover. Again, still incentivizing the same actions, still providing the same initiative to the producer, but really simplifying the overall scheduling and sign up of practices. If we look at the practices, the nutrient management plans that are developed, they're all reviewed and approved by the local soil and water conservation district. And that is within the requirements or as guided by the Ohio Revised Code. This would include comprehensive nutrient management plans within that. So if we have a livestock producer participating in the program, they are developing a comprehensive nutrient management plan as part of the program. The practices, we have had some questions on the process of the practices and how the program actually works there. So the initial phase or the initial portion is for a producer to develop and sign a contract for the practices themselves. Then in general, when we talk about conservation programs, NRCS is the same way, is these incentives work on a reimbursement basis. In other words, the producer is obligated to implement the practice, report that the practice has been completed, provide the required documentation to the Soil and Water District, and that's the certification by the producer that the practice was completed. And then once that practice is certified, then the Soil and Water District will review the documentation, likely do some site visits if it's an overwintering cover crop or some of those other practices similar to that to verify that the practice is there. And at that point in time, once the documentation has been reviewed, the Soil and Water will verify that practice. Once it's verified, then those payments can be distributed back out to the producer for the completed practice. We have been working on some software. We've been working quite a bit on some software to help ODA manage the overall contracting process. as well as track and the completed practices. So we're working with a company called My Farms. We have deployed the software. The initial deployment of the software was actually completed last fall, but we've continued to add capability and make adjustments and do some fine tuning to the software ever since that date. Currently, we have approximately 1.3 million acres loaded up into this software, and we are developing the nutrient management plans in My Farms that will inform ultimately the H2 Ohio contracts. So currently our 14 districts across the Maumee watershed are busy developing the nutrient management plans for approximately 1,900 producers across about 1.3 million acres. So that is one of the things that we're trying to fine tune the software, train our staff and train ag retailers on the finer points of the software, as well as implementing the software for the first time at a large scale. So one of the things that the My Farm software does, it allows the VNMP developer to connect the producer's existing data and import data directly into the system. So what does that mean for the producer? Oftentimes, ag retailers or consultants manage and develop the soil tests, maintain that soil test information for the producer. The My Farms platform will allow that ag retailer or that consultant to upload those results, the recommendations directly into our software platform. So it eliminates double punching. It eliminates the need to duplicate effort, to copy data back and forth. So as I said, we're developing the software. We're still perfecting it, still fine tuning it, but we're really excited about where this software is taking us. The other advancement that we are making within this software is, prior to this software, ODA did not have the tools or the equipment software to manage these contracts digitally. One of the results of that is if we had a completed practice, that practice essentially got applied to the producers, to the farmers' home mailing address. We didn't have any other alternatives. So with the advent of this software, as we get this populated, as we move forward, we will be tracking these practices individually, and we will be able to track and show the completion of that practice at the field level. So we'll position ODA to do a lot better job of assessing the overall program impact if we look at any modeling efforts as we move forward. I think we stated a lot of these things, but again, the platform, the My Farms platform, develops and results in a 590 compliant plan. So the plans are compliant with NRCS's nutrient management standard. We are tracking everything at the field level, and we can allow that development to happen concurrently. So we can have multiple people donating information or contributing information to the nutrient management plan all at the same time. As we look forward, one of the goals for the DeWine administration was also to foster public-private partnerships. And where ODA sees a large potential for that is looking into or at the sustainability markets as we move forward. With My Farm's background and their tracking and their ability to develop APIs, we're really looking to connect to some of those sustainability markets as we move forward. Now, nationally, those markets are really at their infancy. There's a lot of work being done to try to figure out how they will work and how we would track all of those sort of things. Really what ODA would like to do would be to position a producer, a farmer that's in H2 Ohio, to take advantage of the data and the verification of the completed practices and leverage that to participate in those markets. For instance, if the Andersons had a sustainability program, and what we would see is allow the producer to say, I want to share my data, I want to share this information with the Andersons, and allow that connection to happen digitally through the My Farms platform, so that there wasn't any mailing documentation back and forth. That transfer of information could happen very seamlessly. So we're exploring those possibilities. We're very early on, so it'll take quite some time to develop that as a a working regular thing, but we're working towards those ends again to provide some additional funding for how crops are grown, just not how much crop is grown. And then lastly, one of the things that to date we have not talked very much about at ODA is the water management piece. In our original practices, the drainage water management, that middle practice there you see on the left side of the screen, we had installed many of those prior to the advent of H2 Ohio. ODA with the soil and water districts have probably installed nearly 2,000 of those structures. Through H2 Ohio itself, we have not had much success in installing more. The truth is that we're running out of sites where we can match up the site to the requirements of that standard. So what we've started to do, we sent out a request for proposals late in 2022, and we repeated that in the fall of 2023 for conservation ditches. And these would be contracts or applications for the construction of either two-stage ditches or over-wide channels. As a result of those two RFPs, we have over 20 approved projects. Within those projects, it's nearly 14 miles of either two-stage channels or over-wide channels. And the drainage area coming through those is about 20,000 acres. So the construction of those approved projects is slated for this year and 2025. We look for all 20 of those projects for the construction to be completed by the end of calendar year 2025. So we're pretty excited about that. We do plan to continue to take RFPs for for the construction of the conservation channels. As we look at it at ODA, those are some primary natural infrastructure that give us the potential to process nutrients year in and year out without the requirement of annual assistance from a district like the cropland management practices require. So I think that is my last slide. So I appreciate everybody's time, and I will give the floor back to Sandra.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Next up, we have our ODNR. So I think what we're going to do is have Eric is going to share his screen.
All right, is that coming through?
It's coming through in the presentation. I'm going to have to fiddle a little bit to try to get it in the room, but why don't you go ahead?
All right, yeah, apologies to my H2 Ohio and state agency counterparts that I couldn't be with you today in person. I've had a lot going on this week at ODNR and needed to be in the office as much as I could today. And thank you to those of you in the room or virtually joining us today and for your interest in this topic. I'll give a brief overview and update where we are with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources arm of H2 Ohio, which is part of the implementation aspect of the domestic action plan, of course. And I think Terry did a really nice job leading into our focus on natural infrastructure here at ODNR, talking about those three columns of focus for reducing our nutrient loading issues, and water management being kind of where we key in at ODNR with natural infrastructure and with the marriage of nutrient management via water management and habitat restoration. So where we can restore habitat, for example, in the former footprint of the Great Black Swamp in Northwest Ohio, and deliver meaningful nutrient management outcomes as well. We're doing as much of that as we possibly can right now at ODNR. Goes without saying for this audience that this is why we're doing this. We want to reduce the incidence, the frequency of our cyanobacteria blooms in the Western Lake Erie Basin throughout Ohio through a statewide approach now. we want to make and install fewer of these signs every summer. We don't like putting them up. We don't like experiencing this impact on our natural resources. So this is where our program is at this point in terms of project implementation. To orient you a little bit to this map you're looking at, top left-hand corner of the state, and the yellow outline is what we broadly define as the Western Lake Erie Basin watershed. And then the pink outline is the Maumee River drainage in Ohio. At ODNR, we have a statewide program. We address nutrient loading issues through natural infrastructure projects all across the state of Ohio, but we still maintain approximately 60% of our annual funding directed toward the Western Lake Erie Basin. About another 20% of that toward what would be the Central Lake Erie Basin, the remainder of the Lake Erie watershed in Ohio. And we do run our grants funded program a little bit differently depending on the geography of Ohio. We have an open rolling application window for wetland restoration projects and similar types of natural infrastructure projects in the Western Lake Erie Basin. You can get a hold of us at any time with a project idea, and we will co-develop that project with you to make sure it's optimized for our priorities in Northwest Ohio. In the rest of the state, we offer a more traditional competitive request for proposals for natural infrastructure projects like wetland restoration. Incidentally, we will be releasing our next application here just in a few days. May 1st is the next release of our request for proposals for projects that would be in Central Lake Erie Basin drainage and the Ohio River Basin for those that are interested in that. Keep an eye out. Back to this map here, we've got purple dots, which are our projects that are in progress. We've got our green dots that are projects that have been completed since the beginning of our program, which really set out in earnest in late 2019, early 2020. So we're approaching about 100 projects at this point that are completed, and we're starting to hopefully see results from those projects. We also have in Ohio 96% or 94% of our land mass in Ohio is private lands. So we need to engage our private landowners in natural infrastructure projects as well. We work in coordination with the Lake Erie Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, Lake Erie CREP, where we incentivize wetland restoration, floodplain wetland restoration, and reforesting riparian buffers on private lands by essentially offering a cash bonus on top of those practices within Lake Erie CREP, making those much more lucrative for a private landowner. That has been very successful. We have about 200 of those projects in motion at this point. I think about 120 completed, if I'm recalling accurately from the report that I reviewed this morning. We've had a lot of engagement in that aspect of our program. Very, very proud of landowners stepping up and being part of the solution in that case. So our dashboard of where we're at right now, hovering around 170 projects. We are approaching the end of state fiscal year 24 here pretty soon, but we are gearing up to tip 200 at least by mid to late summer as we bring fiscal year 25 projects under contract. We can't do this work alone. This is all work that is done in partnership with grant awardees all across the state. Approximately 80 or so different organizations that have engaged with our program and put projects on the ground. Sum total, we're rapidly approaching 16,000 acres of wetland and associated habitat restoration funded through ODNR's H2 Ohio program. And we are woefully out of date with our landowners that we've incentivized through Lake Erie CREP, and probably that tree number is really low at this point. We need to spend some time updating our graphics over here. We, of course, love wetlands at ODNR. We love wetlands for a variety of reasons at ODNR. I should mention that, the 90 of Ohio's threatened or endangered species rely on wetland habitat for some aspect of their life cycle. But we prioritize our wetland restoration projects through the H2 Ohio program for the potential nutrient reduction benefit for the dollars invested. And that's the principal metric by which we prioritize projects. So I'll zoom through some examples here of what some of those dots look like on the map, some of our different project types. This is a project along the Maumee River floodplain. This is a project that we did in coordination with Black Swamp Conservancy, one of our partners in Northwest Ohio. We called this the Huddle project at first. I think we're referring to this as the Rotary Riverside Preserve now. This is an opportunity to take some marginal cropland and put it back into functional Maumee River floodplain. So when the Maumee stage rises in the spring, as we often see, this former soybean field will re-engage as a functioning floodplain through some enhanced features that hold some water longer on the landscape than it might have otherwise. A bit of an oxbow remnant that's reconnecting to some Category 3 forested wetlands that existed adjacent to this site. Hummock and hollow topography. Again, adding some water storage in the floodplain and also providing habitat benefits at the same time. Closer to its completion, this is what that floodplain restoration project looked like. And at this point, it's much greener. It's had a chance to mature a little bit. And I imagine this is being activated this spring, hopefully with some of our high water events. Over to Seneca County, our Fruth Wetland Nature Preserve. This was it's kind of near and dear to my heart. This was our first funded and first completed wetland restoration project in the headwaters of the Sandusky drainage. Again, tacking on to some existing forested wetlands, creating a small but mighty restored wetland in Seneca County. No one of these projects alone is going to turn the needle in Lake Erie, but we hope that several hundred of these projects of this size and larger might. Over to Hancock County, along the Blanchard River, near one of the local reservoirs. We've got a floodplain wetland that also serves as kind of a flow-through function as well. When the Blanchard floods, it'll flood this area instead of cropland. Nearby subsurface drainage is routed into this wetland, so it has a chance to interact with the soils and plants in this wetland before making its way to the Blanchard River, the tributary to the Maumee ultimately. Our Red Horse Bend floodplain restoration on the Sandusky State Scenic River. This is the project in its early days. Once again, this is an idea where as the Sandusky stage rises, it has a chance to flood into this former marginal cropland, now restored wetland. Before the site had a chance to really even get kicking, you can see where it's engaging, reconnecting with the Sandusky River. This project will ultimately be a part of the Sandusky County Parks District with public access, and for sure some good warblers coming up here in a few weeks. I did mention that we have projects throughout the state, and that can be a benefit to our projects specifically in Northwest Ohio. For an example of this is our Spring Creek Confluence project off of the Great Miami River, which obviously does not flow to Lake Erie. But what we learn from these projects, we can apply to projects throughout the state. We can take what we see as a high functioning design and put that into future project concepts as we continue to fund and develop projects. And also our Brooks Park project here, once again, in central Ohio, but what we learn from these projects throughout the state, we can apply to addressing the nutrient loading issues we have in Lake Erie. And speaking of that, I want to make sure to highlight the significant investment and energy that we are putting into monitoring the impact of our projects, specifically from a nutrient reduction standpoint, which we know is variable with natural infrastructure. Knowing that, we decided from the outset that we needed to monitor our projects in an apples to apples way, in a way that is comparable from one project to the next, in an independent framework. So we contracted with the Lake Erie and Aquatic Research Networks Wetland Monitoring Program. And this is an organization of half a dozen different institutions of higher education throughout Ohio, with folks who have the expertise to look at the soils, the vegetation, the hydrology of these systems, report back to us on what is working, what is not working, how they think each individual system is performing. And we are excited that we are starting to get some of those results back in on some of the early completed projects through our program. In some cases, we see that our modeling estimates are pretty close to what we had anticipated in terms of performance. In some cases, not. But that's why we made this investment. We had a pretty good idea we wouldn't be exactly right in terms of all our nutrient reduction projections. And we're feeding that information back into our program to make better estimates of our projects as we move forward and refine our designs and prioritization of future projects. I'll go ahead and keep it at that, and I'll hang on the line, and I'll hand it back to Sandra. My contact information and a QR link to our website is here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eric. Actually, Josh, I think it'll work really well if you can share your screen. So next up, we have Josh Griffin at Ohio EPA.
Hopefully you can see my screen now. If not, it's on its way. The pleasure of following Eric, which is always a tall order. He always shares some wonderful news with us coming out of their shop. Terry as well. I will talk not about Ohio EPA's H2 Ohio efforts that have been kind of the big topic of the two discussions thus far, but broadly about some other roles and ways that Ohio EPA interacts with the non-point source component of the load in the Lake Erie watershed. So to kind of go over the things I wanted to kind of address in that space is, our non-point source project funding is generally not coming from the H2 Ohio side. Our H2 Ohio funds do a lot of great work across the state, but they're not as targeted at this non-point source reductions that we're so focused on up in the Lake Erie watershed. We do have we do get a substantial amount of funding that comes into the agency through both the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and also our annual allocation for our 319 grants. Another thing we do is a lot of strategic planning work that helps us identify projects that can be funded through these two initiatives, highlighting TMDLs and our non-point source implementation strategies. And a quick closing note I'll go over at the end is, what we're doing now in the space of the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL. So our funding in the non-point source nutrient management space from GLRI comes through Focus Area 3. GLRI is broken down into 5 focus areas, and we have projects in other focus areas as well. And we are also not the only state agency that is getting funding through the GLRI focus areas for projects that are identified. But I highlight our primary awards here in Focus Area 3 over the last several years. The oldest of these projects awarded in 22 here, identified at the bottom as Farm 22, is largely completing its implementation phase. So we'll see that one in action this year in its kind of completed sense. But many of these are projects that are underway. Projects are being developed, and they're all active. So in the last several years, we've been awarded awards focusing both on the non-point source nutrient management, and in the last workshop, Jim Fath joined me and we talked about our technology work. So these are identified as the TAP 23, Auto 23, and then this other one that's currently proposed, ECLY 24. Those projects, these names are the things that they kind of get tagged with in our system, kind of how we keep track of things. But really, those projects are focused on developing technology that can help improve nutrient management in the watershed. But today, again, I'm going to focus on discussing the things that we've funded through our other projects that have focused on non-point sources. These are often fairly substantial awards. Here we've had awards from 500,000 to the highest award of $1 million, 1.75 million. So substantial awards, getting a lot of work done on the ground. An important point to be made about these projects is, Ohio EPA is a deliverer of these awards to local partners. We are completely reliant on local partners to help us identify projects and to really deliver those projects to the landscape. We oversee the grant side of things and direct the funds to them, but the work and effort is really locally driven with great partners, and most of these projects representing multiple partners, often in multiple counties and different regions. So a lot of great work happening here. I didn't provide as much detail for older awards, but GLRI has been around since 2010, and we had 8 prior awards working with up to over 30 partner organizations and over $10 million delivered through the program just through our office. The other substantial funding source we have to draw from is our annual 319 grant funds. These come to us through US EPA as a state delegated that 319 authority, and our annual allocation here specifically targeted at implementation is around 2.5 to 3 million. These are statewide funds, so it's not as focused in the Lake Erie watershed as the GLRI applications are. But again, another source of funding for us where we identify projects, a substantial flow of these dollars into local watersheds in the Lake Erie basin. So I just wanted to highlight some of the types of practices we've funded through these. Some of these align with the practices that our partners at ODA and ODNR have funded as well through their programs. Some of them have happened maybe in the early days of exploring those practices and starting to understand their efficacy on the landscape. And some have maybe not been pulled into those umbrellas as well, but are still maybe good options for the right places on the landscape. We mentioned, the use of controlled drainage. Our Lake Erie watersheds are intensively drained to maintain agricultural production, and it's a practice that helps us keep water on the landscape. Another one we've seen some success with is a structure called a blind inlet. So, in areas where maybe there's surface ponding in the field, traditionally we would see a surface inlet or a Higginbottom type of structure that allows that water to drain into the tile drainage network without interacting with the soils. Here, we eliminate that surface inlet and allow the water to drain, but interact with the soil still, There's also some agronomic benefits here, and you know that folks don't have to farm around these if they're out in the middle of a field. So there's some potentials for some win-win type situations there for farmers and water quality. Another practice that really saw a lot of development through our office and our funding of these practices through both the 319 program and GLRI is the use of the development of saturated buffers. And you know, we have that extensive drainage infrastructure out in our fields here, and those often funnel down to a single outlet near a stream channel. And with a saturated buffer, you know, we put additional tile along the profile of the stream to kind of intentionally recharge that groundwater near the stream channel while still lowering its elevation further out into the agricultural field. These fit often nicely within existing vegetated buffers, and we see some very good response and reductions in those flow rates going out into the agricultural fields. Another practice really kind of pioneered and developed within our program in Ohio is a cascading waterway, and this is taking advantage of here I actually have a picture of the original area where it was developed, and it was an area, you know, we see some gully erosion, we see some vegetation there to try to anchor that soil, but the agricultural producer was not farming through that area currently, and by taking advantage of that space that was really not utilized in the agricultural operation, we're able to both reduce that gully type erosion, maybe starting to form along the sides, improve, and especially at the outlet, as you can see in the top picture there. And also the cascading waterway nature is that we add some retention features within that linear space that allows water to be retained on the landscape, slow down, and also get some of those benefits we see when we can do that: slow water down, drop sediment out, get some uptake from some plants in those basins. And really, to bring these ideas full circle is that we're not just looking at, you know, implementing one BMP. It's really the idea of putting a suite of BMPs across the landscape that really maximize the potential based on the resource concerns at a site. So maybe further up in a field, you might see a situation where you have that surface inlet, and we have some value to add something like a words. We get that opportunity to add that blind inlet, and then maybe moving down through that field scale, we see some of that gully erosion, grass waterway type opportunities. But within that grass waterway, maybe there's an opportunity to add those cascading waterway retention features. But then down at the outlet near the stream, there can also still be an opportunity for a control structure and implementing a saturated buffer. So stacking up those practices to maximize that water holding capacity and hydraulic buffering within the system while still maintaining the drainage we need on the field scale. So thinking a little bit beyond just drainage for drainage, but drainage that allows us to have a more positive impact on water quality. I want to highlight one project from one of the grants above the one I mentioned that would be really kind of coming into service this year. And here we have some stacked practices. We have a saturated buffer, and there's other field practices as well. But we also brought in the idea of having a drainage water retention pond. And then that retention pond can be used to for supplemental irrigation later in the summer when we maybe don't have enough water for the crop. So this isn't the only place we're exploring this idea in Ohio. There were some attempts at it in the early 2000s. The Ohio Department of Agriculture has another grant that's exploring sites and utilizing this type of technology. And we've seen other instances as well that we funded through our 319 program. But the idea there is that, maybe we can use this additional water retention capacity that's having positive environmental benefits to then later in the year yield a agronomic benefit as well to help address some of the costs associated with potentially not having to take some land out of production for a practice. And then our programs also go beyond the edge of field. So we look, we also fund two-stage ditch work, and self-forming channels that Terry mentioned. Their program to date has focused on working with the soil and water districts and county commissioners where we have petitioned ditches that that they maintain, so that they're working in that space, and we have a little more flexibility in our space. We can work with park districts and other local stakeholders that are maybe working with water bodies that aren't in those maintenance contracts with the county, but still serve as good opportunities for channel restoration type activities. And these are places where we see real opportunities for a win-win. We get a water quality benefit, also opportunities to reduce flooding locally, especially as we expand the ability for the stream to assimilate some of those higher flows with the expanded benches and floodplain areas. So to kind of bring those management practices to the landscape, we really have to think about planning aspects. So like, how do we decide what's going to work and where? And at a really high level, the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL brought some of these ideas to the plan to address the impairments that we see in Lake Erie. And here we're integrating these same types of practices as in different categories. So we're enhancing these non-point source sinks. That includes all the wetland work that ODNR is doing with their H2 Ohio efforts. It includes the efforts with ODA to expand two-stage ditches. It includes all of our efforts to implement those same practices. But here again, the lion's share of the effort is on the field scale and working with agricultural producers. And we really emphasize, as all of our programs do, the role that water management plays in realizing our goals. But that's a very large scale, and we recognize that. So within our strategy in the Maumee TMDL, we have a goal to develop smaller scale, HUC 12, so around 30 square mile implementation strategies. And here we look at all of our water quality goals, and a big push within those plans is to tie our water quality goals to specific projects that will help realize them. And these are the projects that are then fundable by the monies that we have available to us. There's been some progress made in developing new non-point source implementation strategies in the Lake Erie watershed. A lot of the recent efforts have been focused in this Western Basin region, and including the Sandusky watershed. We now have 94 approved non-point source implementation strategies. However, something we've been noting is, with all of the effort and all of the work going on, our local partners are starting to struggle to identify projects within those plans. So really, to echo Eric in that, we're really looking for anyone and everyone who has ideas to bring them to us, and we can use that information to help us identify and design projects that help us meet our goals, identify local partners that can help us deliver those projects to the landscape. And also, some of these plans have been developed some time ago, and some of the projects within those plans have already been developed and funded, and they're open for revision. We don't have a real specific process, but if folks are working in areas where those plans are built, a lot of the pieces are there, and really we can open them up and we can add projects, maybe update them with new water quality goals. So there's on our webpage, if you want to see where these plans are, there's a link to the website on the screen here. And at that link, there's a searchable map. You can identify the approved non-point source implementation strategies on that map. And we have a goal to get all of our 319 and GLRI funded projects identified on that map with some fact sheets linked so you can learn more about them. We're undergoing some updates there and improvements, so that part of it's not perfect right now, but that information is available on our webpage for the most part. So a little more information about these 9-element plans, or we call them 9-element non-point source implementation strategies. Sometimes I'm imperfect with the terminology still. Evolving towards just discussing non-point source implementation strategies. So a key piece of them, again, is identifying these projects. And I mentioned these project to be eligible for the federal 319 funding. The projects must be identified in a non-point source implementation strategy. Those projects are also available for GLRI funding. There's maybe a little more flexibility about them being identified in a plan, but the plans are certainly a place we go first to look for opportunities when they present themselves through GLRI. So within the plan, there's a whole chapter dedicated to projects, and the project information doesn't have to be a complete engineering design, but the more complete it is and the more accurate the design is and the costs are, the easier it is to identify it as a project that we can then award funding to. So if we get a larger award through GLRI or a larger annual allocation through the 319 program, we can look to those projects for opportunities for funding. And again, to just echo Eric, we're always looking for projects. We have funding to pay for some of these projects, and having a good suite of projects can really help us maximize the value of the funding spent for the purpose of managing nutrients. And I have down to my closing note here, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Maumee TMDL and what we're doing now. So we've really started at Ohio EPA internally trying to work out a framework for our first biennial report. That biennial report, it was a commitment we made in the TMDL to kind of talk about progress as we go through implementing to meet our goals in Lake Erie. So we're looking at some of the pyramid we built in the TMDL report to help us share the story of Lake Erie and progress, and really looking to talk about what we can identify at the landscape scale, at the field scale, about what kind of implementation is going on, looking at other indicators across the watershed that help us maybe see some trends that are promising to show that we see some of the landscape scale change we know we're going to need to meet our goals. We're going to highlight some of the research that has come out and where that may be helping us refine our efforts to do a better job. We're going to look at the data we have at the water quality gauges at like the Maumee River at Waterville and other tributary gauges that'll help us understand what's happening with stream concentrations, and ultimately we'll continue to share our metrics for Lake Erie, driving at that as our ultimate goal to improve algal blooms in Lake Erie. So that's all I have for today. Going to hang out with my comrades here to hopefully help answer any questions we have.
All right. It looks like Sandy has put a question in the chat. Says these projects say source reduction, which needs to be better defined. These projects target source runoff. These projects do not target reducing actual phosphorus sources, do not put on the land or discharge from a pipe. These need to be evaluated and tracked separately.
I'll answer maybe from the perspective of the TMDL, and that, you know, we do look at and one of the metrics that we can track and intend to track is you know, fertilizer sales and livestock populations and manure within the watershed. So we will have a good understanding of what amount of phosphorus is being utilized in the watershed. Also associating that with crop yields, so we can balance that with, you know, the demand for those nutrients on the landscape. That's not a key piece often of our 9-element or non-point source implementation strategies. But I may, you know, kick it back over to Terry, because, you know, I think the source management side is a very important part of their H2 Ohio efforts.
Yeah, from ODA's perspective, one of the things that we've been tracking, and the reason why we've used the nutrient management plan as the foundation for our efforts, is to make sure that those nutrients that are being applied are in accordance with the guidance, but also to really be critical of those phosphorus applications overall, and make sure that phosphorus applications that are being used by farmers are needed to put bushels in the bin, so to speak. And if we look at some of the anecdotal information, some of the stuff that Josh had referenced on the pyramid there, you know, if we look at phosphate sales through commercial fertilizers over the last many years, they've been on a downward trend for the last 10 or 15 years, I believe. If we look at the crop production versus overall sources of phosphorus in the watershed across the Maumee, at the entire watershed scale, we are operating at a phosphorus deficit over the years. So we hope to use these programs as an opportunity to continue and extend that trend, so that we continue to see less phosphorus used and more of it removed through the crops. Certainly we've got more things to learn on this space, but those are some of the things that we are looking to achieve through the nutrient management plans. So better fertilizer management as well as better manure management to reduce that overall source load.
Okay. So we've had a lot of information. Why don't we go ahead? I have NRCS to speak yet, but if there are other questions about what we've seen so far from the state perspective, if folks want to raise your hand in the meeting, or you can put something in the chat. Or if you're in the room, if you'd like to ask a question based on the implementation information we've gotten so far, feel free to do so. Question? I have a question in the room.
Thanks, Sandra. This is a question and speaks. Oh, I'm Gail Hess with the National Wildlife Federation. And my question is in part about the 9-element plans, and also a reference to what was some text I saw on the DAP itself. But it seems to be there's an emphasis on the structural practices in the plans. And I understand why, you know, in that structural practices are, for all kinds of reasons, easier to track, and, you know, we can model them easier with the ACPF and some other things. But I'm concerned that it's at the expense of looking at the need for on-field management practices. I know there's crop rotations that are in there, but other practices such as VRT or subsurface placement or some of the other on-field management practices are getting, I think, a bit of a short shrift in what we should be emphasizing, especially when we talk about stacked practices and the need for that in addition to the structural for nutrient reduction. And I'm wondering, Terry, if you or Josh want to take a stab at that.
I think from ODA's perspective, overall, we're certainly encouraging those stack practices. And placement certainly is one of the practices that we are incentivizing through our programs. So But I think one thing that is still under development, to be perfectly honest, is understanding of the impact of placement overall, and how it should interact with the overall nutrient recommendation. I think one of the things that we're starting to learn from our producers is not only placement doesn't reduce the potential for runoff in that space, but also can reduce what we need to put on to realize the crop yields that we're intending to have. So, I guess I'm not sure exactly what your question there is, but we certainly are incentivizing that. But I think from a producer standpoint, it's an expensive practice to undertake. And I think what we're also trying to do is show a larger return, either in the increased efficiency and reduced application needs, as well as the reality that that it's leading to reduced losses from the field. So.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, and I've learned from you what a hard sell, things like subsurface placement practices are. But at the same, I guess my question is more about why aren't we highlighting the need for some of those management practices in documents like the DAP. I took a look at a few of the 9-element plans, and the focus is entirely on structural practices. There's nothing in there about the need for some of the management practices in addition to.
Okay, Gail, Mark Smith, NRCS. I think one of the things that I think about when you say that, a lot of times there's pressure on us to move away from the management practices and install some of those structural practices that have a longer legacy. But I agree with you that, the management practices are the direct impact. And then the other factor I think that comes into play, in the last year and a half, a lot of the research, a lot more discussion on legacy and other things. And I think some of these structural practices that were highlighted so far today will also help deal with some of that legacy, as long if we can get it before it reaches the stream.
Yeah, well, I see your point, Gail, about it could be called out more in something like the DAP. I'm not sure that's the most important way to reach the farmers that need to actually make the changes. So we haven't highlighted it in the DAP. It's sort of embedded in the concept of needing the VNMP. But that is certainly something we can think about for the future.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it's about a statement of value, and that the state of Ohio could or should be making that, should highlight that, because there is a need for it. And I understand the challenges with making it happen, and the value of that structural practices bring. But I guess it's just, again, from a broader statement of value in terms of need. I think there's opportunity for the state of Ohio to be saying more about that.
I see a question in the chat. Let's see. Whoop. We have several questions in the chat. Okay, so why aren't resources targeting where the largest actual and runoff sources in the HUT 12s are, rather than anywhere and everywhere? The short answer to that is because we don't have that granular of a knowledge of where there are higher sources. We don't have water monitoring stations at every HUT 12, so we can't say exactly, that one's place is higher or lower. And we also don't have very granular data about soil test phosphorus across the watershed. So the farmers for their own fields can do that through the VNMP process. And I see Terry's nodding along with me. So that's where we're hoping to get the farms individually to work on that themselves. we did put into the DAP that we're going to think about that some more. So I think that we may be able to do some looking at whether we can do some modeling or something that can help us with that. But there's not a really good way to get that granular of a knowledge. And then there is a question for Josh. Looking at the flow weighted mean concentrations, we are going to talk about the monitoring data in a minute. So hold that question, Peter. We will get back to that in a little bit here. Let's see, and Tina, the Blanchard was a watershed of focus for NRCS and GLRI, the demo farms. Again, that one we might, Santina, I think when we're talking about responses to implementation, we're going to talk about that more later. One of the reasons 319 element plans focus on structural, that's what's encouraged under the non-point source management plan. Josh, do you want to try to address this structural in 319 program question that kind of relates to what Gail was talking about here?
And I can help too, Josh, if you need it.
Yeah, I'll let Rick take that one.
Okay.
He's on with us as well still, so.
Just a real quick thing on the 9-element plans. So each 9-element plan has critical areas to deal with various sources of non-point source pollution. And so, for instance, an agricultural critical area would list out objectives, or that would be implementable items or things that could be installed that could help meet the load reduction at the HUC 12 scale that's in the DAP. So in most of the most recent, I would say 3 years of 9-element plans developed in the Maumee watershed, there's a list of objectives that the stakeholders landed on to achieve the load reduction goals if implemented at that scale. In addition, our 9-element plans identify who those funding sources are. So for a lot of cases, they will mention H2 Ohio or NRCS for various riparian programs and things like that. So everything isn't just for our programs in those strategic plans. What filters out at the end, usually on the project side, is the implementation that is eligible for funding so that we can dole out federal implementation funds. So maybe that's where that gets a little squirrely. And then also the 9-element plans deal with other things other than load reduction, such as localized aquatic life use impairment and public drinking water supply impairment. So, but for the ag critical areas, for instance, there'll be a list, and it includes nutrient management, it includes tillage changes, it includes a lot of things, but and as well as implementable items such as 2-stage ditches and grass waterways and other things. So they are in those 9-element plans. It's just that the funding that we end up doling out is for implementation specifically versus planning.
Okay. Thanks, Rick. Could we say more about research in the Huron and Grand River watersheds? Josh, do you want to take that one? Talk a little bit about that target setting.
I can say a little more about it, but not a lot. If we're talking about what's going on in those watersheds, we have, I think, very much been more focused on watersheds in the Western Lake Erie Basin. So, to the end of, having the depth of knowledge and, local research that we do in that watershed, there is less over there. But I think a lot of the lessons we learn over there are generally applicable as we move eastward, but there are some kind of unique differences. And, I think we've thought about some of those differences as we work through, thinking about the targets. And, the Grand River is, I think, a good example of, really thinking in that space. Is we do see significantly lower phosphorus concentrations and nitrogen concentrations in the Grand River. So there's another point that maybe kind of draws back some of the focal points in that area. At the same time, we have had, projects and initiatives in those watersheds to address local water quality impairments and agricultural sources as they're there. The Huron River is more, just adjacent to the Sandusky. So, I think it's much more similar but we do see some unique trends there as well in the data. So, we have monitoring in the rivers, but maybe we don't have as much field scale work going on there, especially in the research space.
All right, there is a little bit of that information is in that appendix in the DAP. And we could, if you want to send me an email with that question, I could circle back with you to see what more there might be available. I don't know, does someone of you want to take Sandy's question about 9-element plans and CAFOs and manure? Or Terry, you want to talk to that one?
Well, I mean, I think from that standpoint, the 9-element plans probably rest at a higher elevation. And if we look at at least my knowledge of the permits and the nutrient management plans associated with CAFOs, they're looking at the nutrient management on these individual fields from that individual livestock. The NIPSIS plans are not operating at that level of detail. So anything that would happen in the NIPSIS plan, at least Josh, you can correct me if I'm wrong, would probably be less detailed and less accurate than what's informed in the permits for the actual manure generation, the actual manure tests, and the actual nutrient generation or the actual nutrient utilization and crop production associated within those permits. So from my perspective, I would not expect the 9-element plans to address those issues, because those should be addressed already in the permit itself as far as the nutrient management side of it, the application requirements. So Josh, I don't know if you have other thoughts here.
I agree with that. And, we do see sometimes some critical areas identified in a 9-element plan associated with livestock. Often those are, some smaller facilities that maybe don't have the same storage and management requirements in a permit. So if we see, or maybe livestock within a stream in a grazing setting, we don't see as much of that in Northwest Ohio in particular. But those circumstances are identified in a 9-element plan, and sometimes there are projects identified to address those situations.
Yeah, I'd say the key word there is they're non-point source plans, and so if it's anything related to a permitted operation, that's one part of it, but also the pollutants that come from either row crop agriculture, whether it be manure related or fertilizer related, the same BMPs would apply to achieve those things. If it's a farmstead related, then those also could and should be identified through that stakeholder planning process as a resource area that needs addressed and prioritized with, development of a project to address those things.
Sandra, I'll touch on it also a little bit in my presentation, but I want to touch base on the, watershed comparisons. Most of us are very familiar with our SEEP studies where, we went out and surveyed farmers and evaluated the process. But the other critical thing is our work with, ARS, Heidelberg, and, the Shallow Run project where we've got the pair watershed. We've had 3 years worth of data where we evaluated those watersheds, and then an RCPP project has now come in and is stacking projects or practices in that field, and we're going to long-term evaluate the response on a monitored watershed where long-term that information will feed into both NRCS projects and state projects and others to evaluate on a watershed basis how much improvement we can expect of what we're doing. And, currently, when we rank our applications, the practice effect is taken into account to determine who gets funded and what practices we put where. So we're doing that on a broad scale. As we continue to dig in and gather information through researchers, we're going to be able to improve our accuracy. But the other thing, and I'm sure that Terry's found this on their nutrient management plans, we found it on ours. We've got a high soil test scattered all throughout the watershed and all throughout a producer's operation. And we are addressing those high soil tests, but at the same time, we're improving nutrient management on all their acres, which makes it a viable practice for the producer to implement across their entire operation. So it is important that we address the entire operation and not just small points.
Okay. I see Tanya is addressing the questions that Peter was asking about the in-stream processing. We do have some work ongoing between USGS and Dr. Jim Hood at OSU. I think we have all been watching that very closely at the state level. I know Ohio EPA and others to see how the in-stream dynamics may be changing what our expectations are of the system, whether it's a source or a sink and at what times. We definitely are following that discussion very closely. And there's other questions. I'm not sure exactly. You're asking a question, Sandy. Will there be an assessment of meat and dairy processing plants as a phosphorus source to wastewater pipe discharges? I'm not sure if there's someone here that can answer that. That'll be our last question, and then we're going to move on to the NRCS presentation.
Yeah, so, I know there's been some work done with the meat and poultry processing guidelines for the technology standards from US EPA. There was a comment period on that rulemaking recently, so we'll continue to follow along with that process at Ohio EPA. We have seen where not just meat and poultry, but food processing in general does in some places become a situation where we see higher phosphorus and nutrient generally discharges from point source facilities. But often those are places where we've already started to increase technology our communities have to address local impairments. A good example of that might be Fremont, Ohio, in the Sandusky watershed, has a large food processing base, and in a fairly recent upgrade, they were upgraded their facility to kind of a more biological nutrient removal type of a process, and they've really even with that large food processing base, have driven their nutrient discharge concentrations down significantly. So it's certainly something that we pay attention to. We've got a long relationship with a lot of industries and communities, and really a positive direction in reducing those contributions.
Okay, thanks, Josh. All right. Give me a minute here. We'll get this other presentation going.
And someone confirm that they can see the slides?
Yes.
Good, Mark. All right, thank you. So spoke with Sandra a couple days ago and kind of changed a little bit of what I was presenting. So I threw some slides together yesterday, and I also gathered some information I think will look a little bit better, and we'll take a little bit look back in my later slides. Just some information related to 2024. Through the Inflation Reduction Act, NRCS is on track to obligate about $54 million statewide in EQIP and another $15 million in CSP. And that's going to be more dollars in those two programs than any time in history. So our offices are really pushing it out there. We're in the middle of ranking and obligation. So it's really important. I looked over some data for the Western Lake Erie Basin and some information that I saw yesterday. We've had some pretty good surges in some counties that may not have been as strong in the past, especially in CSP and other program applications. We've had some personnel turnover and some changes are going even while competing with the state's H2O program. We are still seeing plenty of applications across the Western Lake Erie Basin. RCPP, earlier we looked at the state's H2O program and also mentioned shallow run. Ohio has had an excellent track record in the past of pulling in RCPP dollars. Originally, right after or right prior to the Toledo water crisis, the state of Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan landed the largest RCPP project. In the last couple of years, we have the ODA's RCPP project that is assisting them in the funding of those 10 additional counties that Terry mentioned earlier, along with on the western part of the state. There's a continued tri-state effort between Indiana and Ohio and Michigan working to spend RCPP dollars there. Both of those are approximately $8 million each, bringing those in. And then we've also got the shallow run project running in the Blanchard. And I don't have another slide on it. I was sitting over there thinking the easement program is also seeing a surge in dollars. In this last year, we went to GLRI and advertised the floodplain easement program, of which we had several applicants that we were moving through the process. However, as many of you know, the price or the value of land is dramatically on the increase. And before we could finally close those, the landowners have backed out. So I'm sure that all of us are challenged with locking in land in permanent easements as values increase. So, continuing to work together to find a path forward is very important. Also want to make note to all the folks that are on the line. We are taking applications currently for net RCPP proposals. Traditionally, those RCPP proposals in the state have mainly dealt with EQIP funds. However, all programs, including our easement programs, are eligible for RCPP applications. So if you've got a project that you would like to explore, if it fits that program, you can either reach out to myself or Cheryl Rice, who manages the RCPP program. So just take a look back. We've jockeyed around a little bit more, and I want to thank Steve for putting several of these slides, Steve Davis, who's on several of these slides together. We'd always kind of went with that first column there on a breakdown of the watershed. But as we dug into it a little bit deeper, the third column there that breaks down the cropland acres may be a little bit more pertinent, and we may be looking into that as we look to funding and dividing up dollars in the Western Lake Erie Basin for different initiatives within RCS. Going back, and these go back to 2013 to 2023, it gives you a little bit of breakdown of where the dollars and the total dollars that we've spent in the Western Lake Erie Basin have come from. And this is, I'm looking here, okay. This is really important, in my opinion. If we would not have been able to pull in additional dollars through the support of partners and effort from ourselves, we only would have spent 22% of the dollars in the Western Lake Erie Basin that we did. So when you look at the Western Lake Erie Basin Initiative, RCPP, both the old and the new, and the GLRI dollars, they make up 78% of the dollars, or 78% of that $151 million that have come in. So requesting and working together has proved great benefits. So this gives you a breakdown of where we've spent our dollars. The one thing I'll note, going back to Dale or Gail, your comments on structural practices, you'll see that we've spent about $10 million on waste storage facilities. And the majority of those dollars were spent shortly after the Toledo water crisis. The RCPP dollars were ended up being spent to assist the livestock operations to build storages to meet the ban on winter spreading and to better manage their manure. So, and I'll touch on a little bit more. Sometimes structural practices like these manure storages facilitate the better management of the agronomic practices such as nutrient management and manure application long term. So this is just, looking at that same graph in a little bit different term. Clearly, the cover crops and the nutrient management lead by far the applications. And the other thing that I will say that Ohio implemented early on after the Toledo water crisis, or actually around 2008, when I went up and started managing programs in the Western Lake Erie Basin. If you were going to apply for EQIP dollars and receive a contract, at a minimum, you had to meet 590. If you were already meeting baseline 590, we didn't pay you for it, but it was a non-cost practice that was in your contract. So in some ways, the total amount of nutrient management is not reflected completely because they were no cost items. So Steve broke down the percent, or what we consider nutrient management practices. We feel that nutrient management practices actually go beyond just the 590 standard, such as drainage water management and nutrient management, manure management. If you look there, that's 36, 21, and 21. So 42 and 36 is 78% of the dollars that we've spent in the Western Lake Erie Basin could actually be classified as nutrient management practices. And I guess I think we redid this slide after we talked yesterday, because many of those structural practices that are there could also be there. So at 95%. Going back into the SEEP study, we've got the cropland assessments. We did it 2011, 2016. We went out and did some additional information 22 and 24. That information is still in clearance, and we're hoping it comes out pretty soon. We talked about the long-term monitoring and modeling within small watersheds. We've got one most of us are familiar with is there at Shallow Run. but we are very active in the rest of the watershed. We also do have a wildlife Western Lake Erie Basin assessment that took place. The like I said, the cool thing about the Blanchard, not only did we go out and establish the baseline information, we were able to follow that up with an RCPP project that will stack practices in that watershed so that we can continue to document what the effect of our conservation practices, especially in the watershed. The other factor, early on, Ohio NRCS and the different commodity groups and environmental groups in the state worked together to put a national CIG project together that started funding edge of field projects. Through the SEEK process, we've been able to help ARS keep those active, along with some additional dollars from the state budget. So the water or the monitoring, in my opinion, the edge of field system is tops in the country, and long term is going to glean some valuable information on implementing practices and what we do going forward. Just a little bit of an idea where those are at. Slide on communicating the outcomes. Like I said, we've got the one printing out, and the next information is in clearance at this time. I want to thank Steve and Lisa Duranchek for putting some slides together for me. And the other project that I failed to mention was the demonstration farms that are in the Blanchard, funded through GLRI, and also in partnership with Farm Bureau. And I know also the state ODA is also leaned into that project also. So that's all I have.
Yeah.
Questions?
Santina had a question a little bit earlier about what about monitoring the source reduction in that Blanchard related to like the demo farms, and is there monitoring that you guys are receiving information about? I mean, Kevin King's had a station there, right?
So on 2 of the 3 demonstration farms, we have edge of field sites at the Stabler site and the Chris Kurtz site. We have monitoring sites at both of those, and multiple practices that we are monitoring and following. So.
Let me get it here. All right, are there other questions for Mark about the NRCS programs and information?
So Sandra, do you see the questions in the chat?
I'm trying to get there. Give me a second. Okay, there we go. Let's see. The slides show, 75% of available cropland acres in Ohio. I think that was your slide, Mark, that was
So even originally when we broke up the watershed, we broke it up based on percent of acres in each state. However, the slide that was up there shows that Ohio actually has 75% of the cropland. I think the land acres in Ohio in the Western Lake Erie Basin is 67%. But because we have less, like for instance, Michigan's number dropped because it taken into effect the metropolitan areas that they have in the watershed. They have less cropland acres. So
I was stunned that Indiana was so low. It was only 9%.
yeah, well, and then you take out Fort Wayne.
Yeah.
okay. And then Sandy is asking, other states require liners in manure lagoons and CAPO runoff monitoring. Is there any consideration of this in Ohio?
I can't speak to that for ODA Spark. That's out of my wheelhouse, unfortunately, so.
So I will say that, you know, when NRCS is involved in a practice, we do extensive soils investigation to determine risk. We send soil samples off to our national lab to determine whether or not it is suitable or would need a liner. So we do extensive investigation to determine the risk, and we're pretty comfortable with that.
Okay. Could you please revisit that only 5% are non-nutrient practices? How much is focused on true water management field to stream?
Yeah, I think that if there was 2 slides there, the 5% or the first slide I showed when I believe I said 78% were, I would say, in-field practices. And then to jump that up to 95%, that would we would throw the manure storages in there that allow us to better manage the nutrients through storage and proper timing and application. The non-nutrient practices would get into, say, for instance, our forestry practices that we're doing in the watershed would probably make up the majority of that 5%. But we do not do hardly any, I won't say never, in-stream practices. You know, everything for ours is typically edge of field on up.
Okay. Santina is asking, do we know what percentage of available cropland is receiving funding assistance from NRCS and or H2 Ohio? That's a great question, Santina, and I was hoping that the U.S. federal DAC would help us answer that question. Do we know we have a percentage farmland for H2 Ohio?
I can't speak to Maumee specifically, because we've been tracking it at the county level. But my guess would be based on our current enrollment across the Maumee counties, those 14 counties, that percentage of cropland that's enrolled in either a federal program or H2 Ohio is nearing 50% currently. Now that's enrolled, and at least from the H2 Ohio perspective, we're developing the nutrient management plans on that cropland currently, and we'll be moving into the identifying the practices and the implementation of those nutrient management plans moving forward. But overall, I gotta think it's close to getting close to 50%, not quite there yet, between H2 Ohio and federal programs.
Okay.
But I can't speak to Maumee specific. Just because we're not tracking it at that level yet. We don't have the software to track it at that level yet. So.
Hey, Terry, this is Josh. I know we might not, the programs might not be able to track it that specifically yet, but I know some of the survey data with OACI has asked a question about farmers, you know, if they're participating in the programs. Do you know if that indicates a percentage of participation in any way?
It's only for one hugate in the Maumee, and we just did the Sandusky.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the one that's been out for a while, Josh, is the lower Maumee. The one just released is again the
Yes.
Sandusky. So they certainly indicate that we have a high degree of participation, but it doesn't have the Maumee at the entire Maumee level yet. So.
Right. Yeah. So, but that is a place we can kind of gauge, kind of use as a bar to kind of measure maybe some how effective our programs are at reaching producers.
I agree. I think that's a great point, Josh, and I think there's some real opportunity of aligning those OACI assessments with some of the other tracking that's talked about in the DAT.
Okay. All right, we are gonna switch gears a little bit here. Okay. Yeah, 50% is pretty astounding. Peter, we're gonna get to that in a minute here. Let me pull my presentation back up. You want to be patient for just a moment?
I think Santina